Hello, everyone, and welcome back to DBR with CBR. That's right, it is time once again for Dragon Ball Rewatch. We are your hosts. My name is Alex Maglio,
I'm
I'm
Sam,
John Greenall. Oh,
and I'm Sam Stone.
and we are here with episode 6 of Dragon Ball. So, John, as we have seen, can you give us the rundown of the first appearances? Oh,
yeah.
and before I forget, make sure you're watching along with us on Hulu or Crunchyroll. And if you are reading along, you can pick up the manga and the English translation through Viz Media.
Yep. So this is keep an eye on the Dragon Balls, said in your best Mulder voice. Japanese debut April 2nd, 1986. USA debut October 14th, 1995. Adapting two chapters. Dragon Balls in Danger and Onwards to Fry Pan. That will make sense next episode because the manga titles are set up punchline. But that's the 10th chapter. So in 6 episodes, we've gone through about 10 chapters, which
Yeah.
is a nice pace. Pretty much the plot of this episode is Oolong reveals I had a capsule all along, and it has a very square camper van in it. What follows is Yamcha having a special plan, Mai having her own plan, those plans crossing over in various ways, and now more people learn about the Dragon Balls. Oolong, Yamcha, everyone learns the Dragon Balls are real, and this sets off things. Let's just get into this because this episode is.
This is a
I'm gonna
rough one.
I'm gonna preface this and say while there are moments of the episode that I genuinely enjoy, this is my least favorite episode of the entire original Dragon Ball series, so I'm really glad that we're getting it out of the way.
Get it done quickly, at the very least.
Yeah.
Quickly and painlessly, hopefully.
Yeah, we make a recurring joke that, oh, this didn't age well, or this is of an era. When we make that joke, we are really talking about this.
Yeah, so for those of you watching along, this has a lot of Bulma-centric nudity, a lot of jokes about Bulma's breasts. Bulma gets groped several times. This episode, I would argue, feels worse than the rest of them because Bulma is so not involved in this whole episode. Apart from this, feels very so like in the Roshi stuff, she was like plotting to convince Roshi when dealing with Oolong, she came out to like she was hitting on the Walt Disney Yakuza form. In this episode, she does none of that. She just kind of takes it, and that makes it feel a lot more awkward because it just feels like she's being punched down on. It's
I think it gets even worse when you recall that Oolong drugged her and Goku. We have to get that
oh,
part out of the way.
we have to put yes. So Oolong in his cabin, in his little camper, apparently just has a shelf for drugged juice, as you do.
Yeah.
We should get onto this. Is one of the big changes made here in the dub. You're watching the Funimation dub. They specifically say Oolong has drugged them to steal the Dragon Balls. That's not in the manga, and that's not in the Japanese version. He specifically drugs them to grope Bulma under her blanket when she is sleeping. And also, one of my favorite weird little note changes to this is that in the American dub, they define it as sleeping powder. But in
Yeah.
the Japanese, it is just sedatives. They don't make anything. It's like the Americans try and like make it sound a bit more magical, I guess, and be like, oh, it's not actually as bad. But no, in Japan, it is just he puts sedative pills in there, which he just has because that's what we all have
Yeah,
lying around in our camper vans.
this episode kind of ruins Oolong forever for me. Not that I was like, oh, Oolong's like, what am I gonna do with Oolong? Like he was never like in my pantheon of the greatest Dragon Ball characters of all time. I mean, he's got his appeal, but this, I mean, you can't look at Oolong the same way after this episode, really.
Yeah. I would make the argument that, not for nothing, it feels like redeeming Vegeta and Piccolo is a little bit easier when you remember this. Because at the very least, they were just doing their thing. This feels way too deliberate. The whole, again, like you get the good interactions between Goku and Oolong, but Oolong really in this episode, like it is a bit of a moral event horizon that then the show goes on to completely ignore.
Great, it should ignore this episode as much as it can. Though this episode, I would say, is saved by the non-manga edition of Mayan Shu and their comedy terrorism act,
Comedy
which
terrorism.
Yeah, which, it's the first time we've seen them since they presumably drowned in episode 4 with
So they
Emperor
live.
Fu. So we know they live. Also, one of the things that their appearance in this episode is one of the a Toriyama-ism that I particularly enjoy, which is to say robots with big gangly limbs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
I like
debut
their
of the
giant
Pilaf
stock.
machine.
I
Yeah.
I the thing that I think is very fun about the whole bomb thing is when Shu getting it stuck to his hand, and then it never gets explained how he gets unstuck later to get it underneath the camper van, which it's a good bit, like resetting the whole thing, my freaking out. But that little bit of him just finally getting, why couldn't he do it in the beginning, is kind of my question.
Yeah, there's a few holes in it, but it's such a classic set of slapstick beats that I can't not like them. I just love the fact that if you sort of think about the timing, that bomb was on his hand for quite a while, so he was just walking around with a bomb.
One of my
Oh,
And
other, for me, another source of comedy, effective source of comedy that hasn't aged as poorly as certain elements. And it kind of continues off what we were talking about last week is Yamcha. Yamcha is a great source of comedy in this episode. Both his embarrassment around Bulma and he he takes a shot in the mouth like and that messes up that pretty face of his, though he magically gets his tooth back at some point somehow.
and Sabat's voice acting is always great, but here he's doing a lot of stuff with Yamcha. There's a lot of screaming, there's a lot of like dazed Yamcha. He's really pushing his range, especially, now that we're years after he originally did this character, and now it feels like Sabat sticks to very specific voices, but this was a big show on his range. And it also gave us a timeline for Yamcha and Poir knowing each other, which
yes,
is really
one
interesting.
1 year, 3 months, 4 days, I believe.
I I think
I
that's in the manga. I think in the Funimation dub they say it's 2 years.
Oh yeah, 2 years, 1 month, 3 days. No, I was wrong. It's the same in both.
But yeah, it's kind of cute knowing that Poir has been around Yamcha for this long, and I like the continued build on their little relationship, and like we talked about last time, it's a great contrast to how Pilaf treats his lackeys when you have Yamcha and Poir just kind of being bros trying to rob people.
And it also, I think, sets up nicely all the stuff they have. Because again, it is building up Yamcha to be quite an interesting threat that they've been doing this for 2 years. And that's why they have stuff like RPGs and various cars knocking around, because that's what they've been doing. They've been in the desert blowing up convoys.
Yeah, it's the coolest Yamcha I think comes off. Um, Maybe I mean when we first see him in the prep for the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai, the World Martial Arts Tournament, he's pretty cool up until the first round. But
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, he's riding sidecar with a rocket launcher. He's in his element in this episode, except for when he catches Bulma naked.
Yeah.
That maybe
Yes,
throws him off a bit.
which you see quite a lot of, more than you'd think.
I never noticed before until I rewatched the episode that when Yamcha's all dazed from having seen her naked, that his eyes turn into boobs, and I just noticed that for the first time.
He gets nipple pupils, which is a disease you should see a doctor about if you have.
Oh yeah, lactating eyes is a side effect of Ozempic. Fun fact.
Yeah, which he gets in the manga too. So
At least it's
Oh,
consistent, and I do love Poir just like leading Yamcha away, being like, "It's okay, Master."
there's two scenes that scene when he's walking off days, and at the end when he's trying to act natural while giving them the car. Sabat's voice acting is just so amazing.
It's
he's a
so
great, he's
good.
a great comedic
So
actor.
goofy and so much fun.
Yeah, yeah. It's not just like stern archetypes like, Piccolo and Vegeta and Dragon Ball or Armstrong and in
All Might,
Full
like,
Metal Alchemist, but like or yeah, All Might. Yeah, it's a good. He's got some comedic chops, and I always like to see him kind of flex those. And yeah, Yamcha's a great showcase for it in early Dragon Ball.
I
I
also think it helps that Yamcha in this, the jokes work better with him because they are sort of classic accidental stuff.
yeah,
He is being a perv, but it's at least slightly charming because he keeps blundering into it rather than because obviously there's the scene again added. This isn't in the manga where he grabs Bulma's. He's like trying to find the Dragon Balls in the sheets, grabs Bulma who's unconscious, which is still kind of an iffy joke, but at least it's vaguely funny. It's more funny because it's an accident. He's looking
yeah,
for something else, which is so
Yeah,
he
because
retains his
the joke
charm.
is on Yamcha and Bulma because they're both,
Yes,
and I do think that after this episode, both the manga and the anime kind of take it easier on this kind of content. We're kind of pedal to the metal with with getting the remaining Dragon Balls, introducing the last couple early main characters. Yeah, I mean, Oolong is never this devious again. He's a joke character by the time the tournament rolls around. But
which
yeah,
is good, which is
yeah,
very
he's got that
good.
one last villainous spurt here.
I am plotting his demise. I am rooting for it.
Like I do have to point out one other little fun thing that I had with the whole Yamcha thing is at at the end of the episode when he's laughing with Poir and then like his face hurts and all of a sudden he's just like jumped completely. Like this is just great Yamcha stuff all around and it just reminds me of how sad I am that this character never gets anything good ever again.
The second half of Z, he's inconsequential. Really, after he gets attacked by Dr. Gero and Android 19 at the start of that. I do like that a lot of the Dragon Ball characters, more specifically Roshi, Yamcha, and Tien, get reintegrated more prominently in Super.
Yeah. But
You know.
even then, they make a whole joke on Yamcha about him not getting to come to the Tournament of Power.
Oh
Like,
yeah. Yeah.
poor,
Yeah.
and it is also very sweet that we have this young Yamcha here, just saying that all he wants is to get married or at least have the courage to ask out a girl. And I think that that also kind of offsets the perverted comedy with him because you get the impression that like he wouldn't actively be doing these things because of his fear of women, but he genuinely wants a relationship, and I
He
think that that's very sweet.
he keeps blundering into these situations entirely not of his own making, which does make them funnier.
As much of a bandit as he is, there's that innocence to him.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that that's cute.
Talking
yeah.
of fun animation moments, I love Poir turning into Goku and then Oolong turning into Bulma, especially because Poir's Goku looks like how they, if you see the new Pokemon TCG, how they do Ditto
Yeah.
forms of Pokemon. It's that.
And they've done that for years in Pokemon too. Like there was like that early Indigo League episode where the Ditto isn't transforming right and has that exact same face. Like yeah, that's been a Ditto joke for a long time, and it's so. And then you have Oolong can't turn into Bulma for to save his life.
It's kind of that kind of a frog woman.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's the line where like Yamcha's like, "Oh, I thought she was more attractive the last time I saw her." Like he's like confused by, he's not nervous around the
Yeah,
oolong mama.
I like the kind of the idea that maybe that's a kind of a weird sense he has. He could just tell.
Yeah, yeah.
he
Well,
just
yeah.
knows.
I
He tells
also
her,
love the him by the stairs holding Goku with his mouth covered when Goku's just unconscious because he looks so serious despite the stakes being so low. It's
yeah.
such a fun visual.
We were talking about the landscapes in this, and I love that John's got basically the landscape from this in
Yeah,
his background now. I mean, it's fascinating because we're recording this at the time that like Sandland is coming out, and I remember Alex talking about how like because you cover Sandland, just about how Toriyama just loves these kind of deserty, sandy sandy lands.
I think the thing that I always appreciate about Toriyama's deserts and for a lot of his backgrounds in general is that there's always a sense of verticality with his backgrounds. Like even looking at John's background right now, like it's not just flat desert. There's also these like tall, interesting rock formations. There's always something to kind of keep it from not being interesting to look at. And he does that in pretty much all of his backgrounds. I can't think of a single really boring Toriyama background. You could make an argument for Namek, but even that has like all these beautiful plateaus and all these like tall, interesting round trees. It's Toriyama does such an interesting thing with his backgrounds that they always feel like there's something to look at.
And
They
to sort of build on. Oh, go
oh
ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was saying nothing to build on. Another Toriyama thing. He's very big into his machines, and what I love is that every area has its own feel for its machines. So you see, sort of Yamcha here has the older cars, the mechanical rifles, which makes so much sense. If you've ever done any desert hiking, you know that sand ruins internals. So you need old school mechanical things still rule in those environments. You need things you can take apart, empty the sand out of. So of course he has like an old school explorer car with an openable engine. Of course he's using a drum loaded gun and sort of a bolt rifle because that's the things he can easily repair in his environment. He can't have Bulma's sort of technical capsule bike because it would immediately break down. And
Hmm.
it's one of those things that it means nothing in the overall plot, but I just really like. You can tell that was something Toriyama really wanted and thought about and then included, and I just love that.
Yeah, I do love the last shot we get of Yamcha in GT is he's back in the desert with Poir and he's fixing a car. He's back in the, he goes full circle. Even if he is in his like 50s or early 60s at that point.
It's so hard to tell how old anybody is anymore.
Well, I mean, because of the Funimation dub, they're like, oh, it's 10 years since the end of Z, whereas the manga and Japanese dub, it's 5 years since the end of Z. I think they did that because of how young Funimation wasn't comfortable making Pan young compared, given what happens to Pan and sometimes in GT.
Another interesting timeline point to bring up is that in the Japanese intro to this episode, the narrator notes it's been a week since Goku left home.
Yeah.
So all of this has happened in the span of about 6 days.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's almost real time. Like every episode's almost a day.
And
No
then
wonder he's hungry.
What's interesting though is then you go to Shu with the bomb, and then like Shu sticks the bomb to himself. It has 3 minutes to go off, and then a bunch of stuff happens, and he still has, I think it was like 40 seconds were left on the clock when he was able to switch it off. So in those 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes, we had Oolong drugging everybody. All of that stuff was going on with Yamcha. Like there's a ton of stuff that happens in like that very compressed amount of time, and it feels a little bit like Kabuki time in a way. So
yeah,
Dragon Ball loves Kabuki time. Like that is a thing that it adores.
I mean, it's fine. The later battles like Freeze, that will run in real time perfectly acceptably.
How do you guys like the fight between the rematch between Goku and Yamcha here?
I kind of wish Yamcha didn't get jobbed out immediately.
Me too.
like it's a recurring thing with Dragon Ball, at least original Dragon Ball, the idea that Goku is significantly weaker when he hasn't eaten. And so Yamcha being able to pummel him with the Wolf Fang Fist last week, this time it goes around. Toriyama and the production hasn't quite got the fight choreography down yet. It's still a bit more of a fantasy fairy tale manga where we'll get to the tournament stuff, where it's just like, oh no, this is a fight manga now. But it is interesting to see these kind of early Emperor Pilaf saga fights.
The thing I was trying to figure out was, and I couldn't really tell in my rewatch, if they had reused some of the animation cells from the previous fight with Yamcha, because there were some things that looked very, very similar, and I couldn't tell if it was a redraw or if if Toei Animation was like, we got to save some money, so let's reuse a little bit of the footage, which has never been uncommon in anime.
Don't know. I'm with you. It does look very similar, but I couldn't tell. My eyes aren't good enough to tell if it's a reused frame or not.
Mostly with the charge shots, because the fight itself, when both characters are on frame, not as much, right?
Yeah, but the charge shots definitely felt very familiar.
Yeah. And when we get to a point where Yamcha starts using the Wolf Fang Fist more often, it's the same setup every time with the charging feet turning into wolf legs and everything. So
and it's a good shot. It's a very good shot. It's just that moment of like Toei Animation from what I understand, at certain points in its history has kind of been the equivalent of Hanna-Barbera in Japan as Hanna-Barbera is to America, because Hanna-Barbera did also do similar things to Cost Cut, where if you look at old Flintstones, it's the same background going over and over again. So This was one of those moments where I was wondering if they were doing something of that. But
if a cell's worth drawing, it's worth using 3 times.
I mean, and it just bears repeating again, like before the Kamehameha Wave, the first named attack in Dragon Ball.
Wolf Fang Fist.
Wolf Fang Fist. And we also see the Janken Fist, though he doesn't call it the Janken. Goku doesn't call it the Janken Fist.
Right.
He calls it rock, paper, scissors, or paper, scissors, rock in this.
I think I do want to point out, even though we get a lot of bad stuff with Bulma, I will say Bunny Suit Bulma is such a classic Bulma look, and it is a very, like, I know it's fetishy, but even I have to admit, like, the Bunny Suit Bulma is a cute look on her.
I was just want to bring that up because it's amazing. I don't think if you're a younger person than me, and also I envy you, god damn you all, how that was Bulma's stock look for years. In art, in fan stuff, that was the Bulma. These days, everyone just goes for the Bulma with the Bulma hat on.
Yeah.
But that bunny suit was everywhere. Like, the first things I saw Bulma in were always had her drawn in that. Like, the fan art you saw. It's amazing as well. I looked up how often that bunny suit appears, and it's continuously, like, not just for Bulma, for other characters. Toriyama liked certain things. He put them in, like, it's playable in a lot of the games, I found out.
Yeah.
Like in Dokkan Battle and Dragon Ball Legends, you can play as Bulma in that costume. Dragon Ball Adventure Special, the sort of spin-off magazine, has a version of that costume drawn by Master Roshi, which is the same costume but has panties on the head. Because
Yeah.
why not? Yeah. Also, the Angel of Hell later on wears the bunny suit, which I always find quite amusing. But yeah, no, it was everywhere for so long. It's kind
The,
of weird now how rarely you see it. I mean, for
well,
obvious
I mean,
reasons.
the Playboy Club being more ubiquitous in the 80s, I suppose, than it is now.
Yeah, 1960 was when that costume became a thing. Weirdly, I was looked into this because I was curious, and apparently the Japanese bunny suit thing wasn't linked to Playboy. It started with Playboy, but quickly moved away from it. Playboy never really made inroads in Japan, which is a weird fact.
So it just became its own
Kind of,
cultural
yeah,
touchstone on its own.
yeah. Apparently,
Mm.
I can't verify that because I wasn't in Japan in the 1980s, but
What were you doing?
I was busy not being alive. I'm sorry. I had it
Oh, man.
penciled in. Yeah, no, apparently it was like it came over with Playboy, obviously, because Playboy was a cultural force in the 70s and 80s. But yeah, it kind of became its own thing. And that's why you sort of still see it today, even though Playboy isn't a major force.
That's actually really interesting because like I said, I really love the bunny look on Bulma because it feel because of the Playboy thing, like the Playboy aesthetic of the 70s and 80s. Well, it was meant to be, softcore porn. Like, let's not pretend it wasn't, but it also had a very like kind of playful, coquettish aesthetic to it that it works on someone like Bulma.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah, compared to what we saw earlier, it's much more tasteful.
It's
yes,
much
and
more tasteful.
you got to factor in that. So the 70s and Playboy, if 70s Playboy especially, you had like some of the biggest science fiction writers, some of the biggest fantasy writers, some of the biggest sort of philosophers were writing essays for the magazine. They were queuing up. Like so
Oh
many
yeah.
now legendary short stories were serialized in Playboy first. It was a literary magazine.
Oh
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's
like
a thing.
Harlan Ellison had work in that. Like there are sci-fi writers who everybody would clutch their pearls at, being like, Playboy, my God. But
Yeah.
You know, it still amazes me that this was said. The look, also I saw a Bulma was when I was growing up was this look, and now it's known a lot less, and it isn't the one people associate. But she'll have this for a while. She keeps this for a few episodes.
Yeah.
oh
Yeehaw. Yo,
yeah,
do we have any parting thoughts about keep an eye on the Dragon Balls?
yeah. Let's do some parting thoughts. John, you go first.
I have a couple actually, a few little dub changes that I think will be quite interesting to have. Uh, so yeah, obviously there is the bit about it being a week. In Japan, they're saying this all took place in a week, which is surprising. Also, I like the fact in the manga translation, Bulma calls Yamcha Studley, which is such a 90s, like 80s, 90s translation. You wouldn't have your heroine call someone Studley today. And one of my favorite edits in the sort of original dub of this, Bulma, when she's in the bathroom first, she says she's looking for funguses, not peepholes, which
Hmm.
is, I guess they had to change something, and that was what they went with. But I do quite like the idea that things in capsules still rot, apparently, was that implication?
Mm.
Which does open up the idea that, like, at the end of Super, Bulma will find this bus again in a capsule, open it, and then it'll just be a whole, like, rotted mess. Like, oh, that's where that went.
Yeah. I guess they preserve stuff. Maybe she improves them between now and Super. Who knows?
Also, a thing to note, also in the Japanese version, Oolong, when talking about having his harem of 300 women, one, Oolong, that's your problem. Stop. Oolong mentions he would wish for the cutest girl in the world or a pair of panties, which does foreshadow a moment coming later, which makes it weird they dropped that from this dub because it makes that moment infinitely weirder for some reason.
Yeah, especially how they stage it with the translation.
Yeah, that's my wrap up.
Alex?
Oh, my wrap up. I agree. I think this is probably one of the weaker episodes of the show. I love all the Yamcha stuff mainly because I have decided that I'm going to be Yamcha's lawyer going forward and proving that Yamcha absolutely deserves kind things. I am here on the Yamcha train. But other than that, like I like the stuff that they throw in with the peel off group, but yeah, I actually forgot about this episode entirely until I rewatched it, and I feel like my brain blocked it out as a trauma memory. But other than that, like Sabat is great. The voice acting is continuing to get better and better, but yeah, I'm good with Oolong just being a joke character from now on.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, you can't really look at them the same way after this. And fortunately, I think they maybe sense that, or like maybe we're like, maybe less of this, maybe less of this. And so we don't ever see this kind of side of Oolong, at least not this pronounced ever again. And we're getting after this detour, we are now off towards wrapping up the Emperor Pilaf saga. But we have that dreaded Fire Mountain that got mentioned earlier. So yeah, keep an eye on that for episode 7. This has been another installment of Dragon Ball Rewatch, DBR on CBR. I'm Sam Stone,
I'm Alex Maglio.
And I'm John Greenall.
and catch Dragon Ball on Crunchyroll and Hulu.
And make sure you pick up the Viz Media English translation of the manga, and we'll see you next time on Dragon Ball.